Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a scalpel to a really specific and fascinating piece of political analysis. It's dated November 19th, 2025, and it tracks this moment of, well, rare political gymnastics, a major public reversal by Donald Trump on the Jeffrey Epstein files. The focus of our deep dive isn't just the event itself, the public call for the files release. It's the really abrupt flip-flop that came before it. Our sources capture this initial, very well-documented hesitation, and then suddenly this undeniable pivot toward what you could only call forced transparency. It's a tightrope walk that, according to the analysis we have, either betrays a rare weakness or it represents a highly calculated, very aggressive political move.
That's exactly right. And for you, the mission here is to really unpack the pure political calculus behind this sudden, dramatic shift. I mean, when a figure who prides himself on never showing doubt makes such a conspicuous change, of course, you have to look deeper. Yeah. Especially on an issue that has cast what the source calls a long shadow over the political elite for years. You have to ask what political force was powerful enough to compel that move.
Exactly. We need to figure out what broke the paralysis. Why did one of the world's most visible political leaders reverse himself on something with such high stakes, both personal and political? Let's start with the context of these documents themselves, because you can't really understand the hesitation without getting the immense pressure they generate. Our sources really emphasize that the stakes surrounding the Epstein files are, well, they're monumental. They're not just sensational tabloid stuff. They are described as being crucial for fully uncovering the extent of the Epstein trafficking network. The expectation that's been placed on these documents is that they will finally bring genuine accountability, the kind that could reach into the highest echelons of power.
Yeah, the kind that has really evaded justice for years.
Yeah.
You're talking about a potential political nuclear payload inside these files. And this is why the political environment around them is already so fractured. The source analysis highlights this tension perfectly. On one hand, you have this powerful bipartisan group demanding total accountability, demanding justice. But on the other hand, it says others fear a witch hunt and are critical of the media's coverage. So for the political establishment, broadly speaking, this is just a guaranteed no-win situation. For them, it's not about truth. It's about managed exposure.
And that fear of managed exposure, that brings us directly to Trump's initial posture, doesn't it? The hesitation, the reluctance to just immediately support a full release. That was the first red flag that analysts noted. And the document points to two immediate compounding reasons for that delay. Both of them are just deeply rooted in political risk.
The first reason is the most straightforward one, but it's also the most politically paralyzing. It's the concern over potential direct or even indirect connections. I mean, we know from public records that Trump had interactions with Epstein years ago. So the question was never if a proximity existed, but
whether the documents would reveal specific damaging details.
Exactly. Details that could be leveraged by rivals in the upcoming 2024 presidential cycle. That initial silence was like the political equivalent of just holding your breath. Yeah.
Just waiting to see if the blast radius would reach you.
Mm-hmm.
And the second reason, that's where the image management really comes in. Initially, he might have feared that demanding the files release would just feed into existing media narratives, the ones that already portray him negatively, regardless of what the files actually revealed about him personally.
Right, because being associated with that coastal international jet set crowd,
yeah,
that's already an Achilles heel for his outsider brand.
So inviting a massive media frenzy just seemed like an unnecessary risk. It could highlight a kind of hypocrisy.
And that calculus, it held true for a time. But then, as the analysis meticulously tracks, the reversal happened. And the core observation from the source is powerful. It says the sudden forceful reversal suggested a conclusion had been reached, a conclusion that the political cost of resisting the release had become greater than the known risks inside the documents.
So transparency, even if it was forced, was now deemed the best path forward.
The initial resistance just crumbled. The public pressure cooker became too hot to handle.
That's the key moment, isn't it? If the risks were so huge, both personal and political, what broke the logjam? What forced that move from strategic paralysis to, aggressive action? This is where the analysis gets truly shrewd. Yes. It details the three primary influences that analysts believe drove this abrupt about-face. And we'll start with public pressure, because the source notes this was the necessary accelerant. It wasn't just the media demanding answers. It was grassroots, activists, even some rival political factions, all demanding transparency. The demand for accountability was just Undeniable.
Yeah, you couldn't get away from it. The analysis frames the reversal not as a choice of policy, but as a compelled response. A political mandate, really. The longer he resisted, the more he looked like part of the very establishment he rails against.
Right, and what's so fascinating about that pressure is how it forced him to calculate the other factors. Which brings us to the second key driver, the strategic benefit. And for this, you have to understand a kind of game theory approach to political scandal.
This is a huge insight. Some analysts suggest that Trump strategically believes the release could ultimately benefit him, not because he's entirely clean, but because the exposure of his high-profile rivals will be, exponentially worse.
So you're suggesting he's betting that his acknowledged proximity is less damaging than the deep, hidden entanglements of others. I mean, that's a massive political gamble.
Precisely. A huge gamble. If the documents reveal damning information about current political adversaries, say specific members of Congress, global business leaders, major media figures, he believes he can weaponize that chaos. It's the definition of turning a political liability, his association with Epstein, into a perceived asset.
By exposing the rot throughout the rest of the system.
Exactly. He's shifting the spotlight from his own acknowledged past to his rivals' current vulnerabilities. It's a classic move.
And that strategic calculation feeds directly into the third factor, reinforcing his outsider positioning. To many, a former president commanding the release of sensitive files, that looks less like an outsider and more like a power player. Yet the analysis shows that by making this public, aggressive call, he demonstrates his willingness to confront powerful interests, even at the risk of personal exposure.
This is a classic narrative pivot. He's taking the blow, the inevitable scrutiny of his own ties, but framing it as necessary collateral damage in a battle against the swamp. So he positions himself as the only person willing to take that risk for the sake of exposing the powerful elite.
Which allows him to maintain his anti-establishment branding, despite his extensive connections within that very elite group.
Yes, because he's seen as actively attacking their collective secret.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture, this is a masterclass in leveraging public mistrust. He's using the files not just to gain information, but to utilize the public's deep cynicism about the powerful. By demanding the release, he aligns himself with the people demanding answers, and in doing so, he fortifies his base's belief that he's the necessary disruptor.
Now, moving on to the significant political implications. We have to recognize this is a multi-directional political earthquake. The analysis highlights that the damage potential extends far beyond one individual. The release has the capacity to damage the reputations of numerous high-profile individuals. And it spans major political figures, prominent business leaders, E-list celebrities. This is not a contained event. It's a systemic shockwave.
And focusing specifically on Trump, the analysis makes it crystal clear why this is such a high-wire act, especially heading into the 2024 presidential cycle. The scandal presents both a monumental risk and an undeniable opportunity. Let's elaborate on the opportunity first. By embracing this radical transparency, he attempts to deflect historical criticism and position himself immediately as the champion of the people.
Right. He's the one who finally forced open the doors that the entrenched elite desperately wanted to keep locked.
And that plays directly into his narrative that the establishment is rigged and he's the only one who can break it.
However, and this is a huge however, the potential benefit is tethered to a massive risk. The analysis is emphatic on this point. Any direct or indirect links to Epstein could prove damaging. In the current, highly charged election environment, damaging could mean an existential threat.
Even if the links are tangential, political opponents will weaponize any perceived proximity.
Which raises the critical question that the analysis poses. How much personal risk is deemed acceptable for the massive political gain of destabilizing his rivals? And furthermore, this internal conflict, the hesitation versus the final demand, is deeply scrutinized by his core base. His supporters often value his image as the strong man, someone who is immediately decisive, aggressive, and never shows a moment of doubt.
So how does that hesitation play with the base? The source indicates that for some, that initial pause, the quiet calculation, it could easily be viewed as a sign of weakness. It implied caution, self-preservation, which really runs counter to the persona of absolute fearless confidence that defines his brand. That moment of paralysis was a crack in the armor. It needed immediate repair.
Which is why the eventual theatrical reversal was so crucial. That aggressive shift, the public call for transparency, is then applauded as a bold move against the political establishment. It acts as a kind of narrative repair. It says, I wasn't afraid of what they might find. I was strategically waiting for the right moment to use this chaos to expose my enemies.
He reasserts dominance by attacking the very system that created the scandal.
Hmm.
So the analysis, it seems to lead to a unified, central finding. The perception of this entire event is highly fluid. It's almost entirely dependent on framing. It shifts from being seen initially as a rare weakness, a cautious, vulnerable moment, to a carefully manufactured position where he's seen as a champion of the people.
A decisive moment of necessary confrontation.
So the political optics aren't just important, they are the entire battleground.
The source material is essentially mapping the rhetorical strategy. It's not just about what is revealed in the documents. It's about how quickly and effectively the political figure, in this case Trump, controls the narrative surrounding the revelations.
Both to his base and the broader public.
Absolutely. He has to manage the fallout faster than his enemies can exploit the content.
Okay, so let's quickly synthesize the competing forces we've analyzed here. We saw this undeniable, compounding public pressure that forced a calculated hand. We examined the sophisticated strategic maneuvering aimed at confronting powerful interests, using the documents as a political weapon to destabilize rivals. And finally, we acknowledged the inherent, unavoidable risk of personal exposure contained within the documents themselves.
And this brings us right to the source's ultimate conclusion, which is a kind of dual contingency. The lasting political impact of this whole saga on Trump's future will depend entirely on two things. Number one, what the documents reveal. And number two, how effectively he manages the fallout. It's a high-stakes, real-time game of disclosure and damage control, where narrative control will, at the end of the day, determine the success of this monumental reversal.
That pressure to adopt transparency, even if it's viewed as a forced capitulation, it seems to be a hallmark of modern, high-stakes political crises. What stands out to you is the fundamental political necessity of embracing controversy head-on, because avoiding it or hesitating too long often costs more than confronting it. Even if you are the one initially exposed, it certainly gives you something to consider about the dynamics of power and information control as you go about your day.